can you tell me, just to help me adjust the audio levels, what you had for breakfast, or just say something?
Yeah, so I'm usually a breakfast skipper, but I woke up this morning and decided that I hadn't been to McDonald's in a while. So I bought a load of food from McDonald's, ate the cheeseburger, but decided that I wasn't really interested in anything else. So the dog ate the rest.
Oh my god, what a story! I love that. Cool. Now, it seems like we're all adjusted in terms of audio. And what I'm going to have to do now is do questions. I've written a couple
Hmm.
questions, which I hopefully I'm going to find. I did. Speaking of food and cooking, I'm going to want to be asking you about how much you cook. And I've got a story. I was introduced to cooking by Tim Ferriss, specifically his book, The 4 Hour Chef. And
Hmm.
this book had an influence on me. And I'm curious to ask, what is your relationship to food and cooking?
I like to cook a lot, but to be, completely frankly honest, diabetes and carb counting and all that sort of stuff has given me a slightly warped relationship with food. I mean, I love food. I've always loved food. I've always loved carbs. But at certain points in my life, food has been sort of difficult. But I do love to cook a lot. I mean, yesterday I decided to make a very British version of a lasagna with baked beans and cheese and sausages and all that sort of stuff. And I posted a video to TikTok, with instant mashed potato on the top of it. So a proper typical British sort of pauper food dinner. And it's got like hundreds of thousands of views on TikTok. So I like to be creative with food. I like to have a bit of fun. But it doesn't always go well because I sort of go into the kitchen thinking I'm like a master chef, but I'm not. I'm just messing around and playing with different things, and sometimes it turns out great, and sometimes it doesn't.
Okay. Have you taken any food courses, or where did you learn cooking?
No, not at all. No, I've never ever done any sort of food courses. They do a carb counting course here in the UK for people with diabetes, so you learn to sort of how to count your carbs and how to do all the maths and that sort of stuff, but never any practical cooking instruction at all.
Right. Do you wanna?
Maybe, yeah. I mean, it's another skill. I'm all about consistent learning and improving all your skills. So if I think I'm a semi to all right chef right now, maybe that could tip me over the edge and get me a Michelin star.
For sure, for sure, for sure. Speaking of Michelin star chefs, there is one that stands out for me, whose name is Chef Massimo Bottura, who's encouraging people to think about food differently and even attempt to use the leftovers that create unique combinations of dishes. And so he's basically cooking out of leftovers and showing people that you too can use the leftovers to create unique combinations. I think that's fascinating. And which brings me to another question. How would you encourage other diabetics to think about food differently?
I think you've just got to remain practical about food because I think it's all too easy to restrict and to cut out the food groups that give you trouble when you're dealing with your blood sugar. So, for example, there are foods that I will straight up avoid. Um, and that can lead you sort of down a sort of a sticky path. It can lead you into some situations where your relationship with food does become warped and does become difficult. Um, but I don't know. With a little bit of planning, anything's possible. So if it's not like I could just order a pizza now and have it delivered in 15 minutes and go about my day as normal. I'd have to make adjustments to my day with to to accommodate the eating of that pizza. But the fact is that the diabetes isn't going away, and you need food to survive. So you have to sort of meet in the middle somewhere, and not restrict your diet, not ban yourselves from eating certain types of food, and just sort of, I mean, go with the flow a little bit because blood sugar spike isn't nice and it's hard to deal with. But then also eating a very sort of bland diet and sort of a way too protein rich diet isn't that good for you either. So it's a difficult sort of line that we traverse living with type 1 diabetes. And I don't know if I've even sussed it out yet, but I think the only thing that I do know from my lived experiences is that restrictive diets and restrictive eating is one way to almost absolutely fail. So trying to eat normally, trying to eat what you enjoy, what you like, but then you can also find swaps for things. So, for example, I really, really, really love noodles. And for a long time, for many years, I'd sort of wondered how I could have noodles regularly and not have the sort of dramatic impact on my blood sugar, because noodles are quite, they're quite simple carbohydrates. They're not generally, that nutrient dense, but I like noodles. So
Right.
I found a version of noodles that is made from, I think, a mushroom protein. That
Oh,
it's not the best. It's not the same experience, but it allows me to eat noodles, and then when I really, really want noodles, I'll go for real noodles. So I think it's a balance.
wow. Now I want to have some mushroom protein noodles. Cool. Which brings me to the question, do you have cheat days?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Today's a cheat day. I woke up. Just before we hit record, I told you about my trip to McDonald's. I woke up and I thought, today's a cheat day. Today I'm not working. Today's my first day off in probably about 7 days, a whole day off. And I do have those. Yeah, absolutely. And all I do with that is load myself up with insulin and crack on, because I think it's good for people's mental health too, because and I dealt with that very early on with getting diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. I was diagnosed in later life. I say later life, in my early 20s. And what I found that I had such a tight control on my diet and what I was eating and consuming, that it really made me sort of feel it was overwhelming. So I do make a point to, when particularly if I'm craving something, I will schedule in a time when I'm going to eat the food that I'm absolutely craving. And yeah, I guess that is my cheat day.
Right. There are days when more ice cream is absolutely guaranteed and allowed.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. So thinking different is a theme that we are about to explore. And Think Different was a campaign by Apple, and they have created some awesome products for diabetics. One of the products I love is the Apple Watch. It helps me keep track of my burnt calories and my glucose levels at the same time. What tech do you regularly use to manage your glucose levels, and what do you wish they could do better?
So I'm incredibly lucky. So I have a sort of it's a closed loop system. So I use a Tandem T-Slim X2.
Mm-hmm.
I use a Dexcom G6, and I also have an Apple Watch. And that, I'm very new to that. So before I was on a Freestyle Libre and a pump that didn't connect with the Freestyle Libre, obviously, because I don't think they do.
Mm-hmm.
So I've got the full suite right now. But I do often find myself feeling like too much information is bad for you. So, for example, I work in broadcasting. I'm in studios, I'm in radio studios, I'm in galleries or control rooms and TV stations and that sort of thing. So, anyone that lives or uses a Dexcom and a Tandem T-Slim specifically will know about the alarms and the frequency of the alarms. So sometimes I do find myself having to disconnect from all of that constant information, and especially when friends are around and they want to, they've got the app on their phone so they can see your blood sugar should anything go wrong. And I know that my blood sugar is spiked and I'm consistently high, but I'm just waiting for my insulin to work. And then you get alarms on your mum's phone and then your friend's phone, and it all gets a bit too much sometimes. And other people worry that aren't diabetic, they don't know how to deal with it and aren't sort of, you know, aren't up to speed with how everything happens. So yeah, I do think that too much information is a bad thing, but I don't think I would completely disconnect myself entirely, because it is really handy to just glance at your wrist and see which way the arrow is pointing. Is it going up? Is it going down? Is it sort of steady? But I do also think that seeing, like a consistent 9.7 really gets in my head, because I'm a bit of a perfectionist. I mean, if you ask me how my blood sugar is, I say, oh, I'm perfect. I control it well. But the reality is I don't. I'm type 1 diabetic. Who knows what my blood sugar is going to do? So a constant reminder of the fact that my blood sugar isn't quite perfect is a bit annoying also. But yeah, I have the whole suite. I've got all the tech, and I use it to its fullest when I think I'm prepared for that.
Right. Well, now I'm gonna take you back to the old days, if I may. What were the old days like, and do you remember those? And what are the main challenges physically, mentally, and emotionally?
So I was diagnosed at 23. So I'd already done childhood, adolescence, and even university. I was just sort of embarking in my sort of professional career, and that's when it happened. So I'd managed to get through all the awkward teenage years and the sort of learning who I was and learning to be myself and all that sort of stuff. So I've had a slightly different experience to a lot of people that get diagnosed in their youth. But when I was first diagnosed, I was on multiple daily injections, and I had this awful. I think Abbott made it. It was called the Freestyle Optium Neo. This really, really like clunky, slow blood glucose monitor. And it was finger pricks, obviously. And I used to test my blood sugar. Because test strips are free here in the United Kingdom. You can get as many as you want. And I used to test my blood sugar literally every 5 minutes. And I would dose myself up with insulin. I'd take an injection, test my blood sugar again. If I was spiking, I'd take more insulin, and that would then lead me to hypo. So I used to have a lot of hypos. And the difference between then and now is that I've got a clearer picture of what my blood sugar is doing. So the trend graphs, I think, I didn't have a great time with the Freestyle Libre, but still the trend graphs were a great sort of insight into what diabetes was doing and what my blood sugar was, how my blood sugar was performing. Because when you just get here's how I think about it. So having a constant glucose monitor or a flash sensor, something like that, it gives you a wider picture, whereas a finger prick blood test gives you a small snapshot and no context around it. So before, I was taking loads and loads and loads of insulin and having loads of hypos, and then of course eating loads and loads of sweets to correct those hypos. But now I'm a bit, I'm not so trigger happy with insulin, because I've got a clearer picture as to where my blood sugar is going. But really, I came to diabetes in quite a good time, because 2 years after I was diagnosed, I got a Freestyle Libre. Another 2 years after that, I was on a Dexcom. So I sort of joined the club at the right time, I think. So I haven't had to live through the dark ages that I hear so many stories about, where living with type 1 diabetes was, a really scary and confusing time.
Right. As a matter of fact, we are celebrating the 100th anniversary of insulin. Before that, there was no diagnostical tool for us to figure out what our illness was. And so I think it's a blessing that now we have medicine for this.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's the only way we sort of survive. And I always think about the story that I'm told so often about the ward in Canada, where Frederick Bantin first gave a injection of insulin to an emaciated child, in a room full of emaciated children on the verge of death. And by the time he reached the other end of the room, the first receivers of that newly synthesized insulin were coming around and returning to full health. It's almost like I only say this because I've been on a sort of superhero movie marathon over the past few days. I'm currently watching X-Men right now, but it's almost like our kryptonite. The removal of insulin is sort of our kryptonite, and the fact that that's all we needed to thrive and survive is, if you think about it properly and get really into it, it can be a bit scary, but I think it's amazing that it happened, and I feel very lucky to have been born in an era where both the technology is good and the production of insulin is, secondhand to the pharmaceutical companies that make it.
Right, exactly. And speaking of heroes, you mentioned those. Who do you look up to as role models, and why?
I look up to people who are fiercely themselves. So I sort of made a promise to myself when I was first diagnosed that I wasn't going to hide it and I wasn't going to be shy about diabetes, because the fact is that I nearly died. And the fact is that I nearly died because I wasn't, recognizing my symptoms or asking for help when I needed to. So there's just a sense of person that I really sort of aspire to be. And I don't particularly look up to one certain person, but I will appreciate aspects of different people. It's almost like I want to collect their best traits. And the most sort of attractive trait that I have discovered in my many years of meeting people and interacting with people is that the people that are just so unashamedly themselves, and the people that are really upfront and they really take their own sort of self and oh god, I don't know what I'm saying here, but they what am I trying to say? So the people that take their self and their personality and put that forward as like a priority, that's what I really aspire to do. And I think I only sort of picked that up and realized that was the way that I think everyone should be, is when I got my diabetes diagnosis. Because before then I'd been sort of like overly polite and a bit, I didn't have much agency before I realized that my own health and survival was in my own hands. And since then, I've realized that the people that I look up to and aspire to, there's too many to count, but they do that. They have a real sense of who they are. They have a real sense of what they need, and they're not horrible about getting there. Because working in broadcasting and TV and all that sort of stuff, I've met several people who are absolutely the best people you'll ever meet. But then on the other side, I've met people who will do, really shady, awful things just to get a little bit further ahead. And I think I only realized that there were sort of those two sorts of people after I was sort of placed this responsibility, living with diabetes, after I was, told that, your chances of survival are like up to you and you alone.
Wow, yeah. Interesting situation, which brings the topic, reminds me of the topic of support. And support, I think, is an incredible part of our lives, and we get to have the luck that our family supports us. So I want to ask you, how does your family support you?
If I needed help, they'd be there, obviously. But I've tried to be really independent with diabetes because, like I say, I was diagnosed in my early 20s. So I'd moved out. I'd moved, hundreds of miles away, and started my professional life. And it's not like, so there's a sort of, I think, a difference of experience with people that were diagnosed with type 1 diabetes in their younger years. The adults, the parents, learn diabetes at the same time as them, essentially. and that's different with me. So my parents have had very little exposure, but they do worry. They are concerned. And there is a slight, weight on my shoulders that I need to prove to them that I'm not ill, sick, or unhealthy, or anything like that. And especially when I go out, I go out to bars and on holiday with my brothers. They are a bit protective of me because obviously I have a health condition that could lead me to very sticky situations if the certain circumstances were right. But I think I haven't lent on my family too much in this. I've definitely lent on my friends, um, but all in all, I think, like I was saying before, I think I've arrived at diabetes in a very sort of a time period where there is a lot of support, that you don't in a lot of support in the way that I mean that it's like it's clinical, it's professional. I haven't had to have long conversations and get really teary with friends because I have diabetes. If I need help with something, I can ask my healthcare professionals, and that's been sort of a godsend. And I think that's uh, it's a bit of a postcode lottery in the UK because not everyone can get the sort of standard of healthcare that I get. But I've been very lucky where I am in the country, in the southwest of England, that there are smaller areas that look after people. So I get a lot more face time with my healthcare professional team, and like I've said, I've got access to a lot of technology. So I try not to lean on my family for support because I think it's more like I know what I'm doing with diabetes. I can look after it. As long as my parents know I'm okay, I think then that's a weight off their shoulders. So I try not to burden them, but if I needed to, they'd absolutely be there.
Absolutely. And I think this support that we receive can only be, you know, we say thank you in a way that we give support back. I want to ask you, how do you wish to support your family and friends?
I would just be there for them in the same way that I expect them to be there for me. I mean, there is sort of an unwritten rule with my group of mates, the boys, that we just will go above and beyond for each other, and it's almost it is absolutely the same with my family. There's an unwritten rule that whatever anyone needs, you'll be there, and I mean, luckily, no one's had to call on me too many times, because they're in a dire situation. But in my friendship group, there is someone that lives with type 1 diabetes who was diagnosed before me, several
Mm-hmm.
years before me, and he doesn't deal with his condition so well. So I've often thought about how I am best supporting him. And the thing that I've come to is the fact that he's a very stubborn person. He's very set in his ways, and he, in the nicest way possible, is sort of he is a dopamine searcher. He will only do something if he's interested in it or it makes him feel good.
Mm-hmm.
So I've often thought about how am I best to support him, because we both live with the same health condition. And the conclusion I reached was that I shouldn't make him feel bad about himself. I shouldn't feel like a teacher wagging my finger at him, telling him no. I've reached the conclusion that I'm the best support when I understand what he's going through, and I understand that he can't or won't deal with his condition in the way that I deal with it, but I'm there as a support. And when I do find that it's just acceptable for me to give a bit of advice or sort of point him in the right direction, then I can do that. But it was a sort of a several year process to get to that point, because I sort of approach diabetes very pragmatically. It's a math equation for me, whereas for him it was much more emotional.
Mm-hmm.
So learning to sort of talk in his language in that sense makes me a better friend that can look out for him and help him and put him in the right direction and make sure he can advocate for himself in a sort of healthcare scenario. So like I was saying about the postcode lottery, he lives in a different part of the UK to me. and the healthcare situation there is very different because it's a wider area and there's more. The budget has to stretch further for the NHS in that area. So, giving him sort of ways to advocate for himself, I think, is one of the things that I'm most proud of, because he is doing better now, and I think that's down to it's not just down to me. I'm not going to take credit for all of that, but if I had gone in and been really sort of confrontational and told him that he was doing everything wrong, I don't think he would have been receptive to any advice that I would have given.
Right. I think this brings us to the question of a coach or a mentor. And I have been fortunate to have mentors and coaches throughout my life who helped me greatly. I'm interested if you have mentors both professionally and in a family setting.
Sorry, say that again.
I'm interested if you have mentors.
Definitely professionally. My dream is to just do what I love for a job, and there's a lot of people in the sort of media industry that will just become a friend and help you out. And I feel like there should never be just one person giving you that sort of advice. I don't have like a diabetic older brother or sister or someone that can, teach me the ways and that side, but I definitely do professionally. And there are people that have, been in the industry and for many years and have been through the experiences that I'm probably going through now. And it is really important to just have a sanity check, at least, with someone who you trust. Maybe that doesn't sort of happen in my, diabetic life, but it does elsewhere.
Right. Final question, which can lead us to a dead end, so I'm sorry if that happens, but I think it's a good question and I like asking this one. Are you ready for it?
Of course.
Is there a question you wish more people would ask you?
Oh, okay. Is there a question that most people would ask me? I mean, I wear my sensor on my arm, and you know what? In the past sort of 3 or 4 days, I've seen so many sensors in people's arms, so many Freestyle Libras, so many Dexcoms. I wish people would, because I'm sure, I can put myself in other people's shoes, and I can put myself in other people's shoes, and I can imagine what they're thinking. And I just wish more people would be inquisitive. I mean, it's a bit weird stopping someone in the street and asking, what's that thing in your arm? A lot of people, especially in the UK, might think that's a bit rude. But I'd be so happy to, excuse me, to pull out my insulin pump and show them the sensor and show how it all works. Because I think we're going to see a lot more technology helping people with long-term health conditions live a normal life, and breaking down the sort of stigma about it is only a good thing. So if I was to say another one, I wish more people would ask me if I'm okay, how am I doing, because sometimes it's good to just vent and get it off your chest. I think with diabetes, you deal with a lot of stuff all day, every day. You deal with a lot of frustration, you deal with a lot of disappointment, you deal with a lot of fear and anxiety. And I'm not sure how many times I would be able to honestly answer the question, but I do wish people would just say, how's it going? Are you okay? Are you dealing with... sorry, a phone call went through then. I do wish some people sometimes would ask, are you okay? How are you dealing with it? Is everything working well for you? And yeah, I guess that as well.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic. Jamie, thank you very much for answering these thoughtful questions. Thank you for being there for us. And thank you for being who you are. You're an amazing dude.
Yeah, thanks for taking the time to talk to me.
Absolutely. Catch you soon.